Decolonizing the curriculum and technology. This is my presentation. My name is Asanda Ngoasheng, and I'm with the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Affective learning tells us that in order to know differently, we have to feel differently. Feeling that something is amiss in how one is recognized, feeling an ill fit with social descriptions, feeling undervalued, feeling that same sense in considering others. All these feelings can produce a politicized impetus to change that foregrounds the relationship between ontology and epistemology precisely because of the experience of their dissonance. This presentation will deal with the affective learning that I've just described. I started teaching in an interesting context. The context I was teaching in was that it was the post-RMF, the post-FMF era, which changed the South African landscape and especially the media landscape. Previously taboo topics suddenly became everyday conversations. There was increased engagement with issues around white supremacy, white privilege, racism, sexism, classism, and so many other issues that previously we didn't talk about. These concepts and theories exist in sociology and political philosophy, but I wanted to know how could we translate them into journalism teaching. I then embarked on a process of thinking about and developing a decolonized curriculum. What does this mean? This essentially means that I had to develop a curriculum that acknowledged that our current knowledge is based on knowledge built up during imperialism, colonialism, and apartheid. I had to acknowledge that the system was hurtful and deliberately misrepresented blacks, women, the LGBTI community, the disabled, and many others. It also meant looking at all content and teaching with a fresh pair of eyes that asked about who was missing from the picture and whose voices were not represented and why. It was about beginning to be comfortable with discomfort and feelings of guilt. What was really important in this process of decolonizing the curriculum was acknowledging that apartheid divisions still play an important role and have an effect on where people live, work, and play in South Africa. It was also about acknowledging that apartheid categories still determine who has access to resources, and as well as people's views, that is, of themselves and of others in the society. I encountered a classroom challenge. My biggest challenge was that students were mostly apolitical and had very little understanding of South Africa's history and politics. That's because the history of South Africa, and especially apartheid, is not taught sufficiently at high school level. Students also do not always understand the impact of apartheid racial categories on where people live, work, as well as their ability to access the political system and voting patterns. I had to unpack what this meant. I tried to tackle this in my teaching and taught about apartheid inequality and the different experiences of oppression and discrimination which were experienced by Indians versus Coloureds versus Africans. And although these people all now fall under the term political black, there was a differentiation in the manner and the implementation of the oppression and the discrimination by the apartheid government. So I spoke to, for example, how in 1982 the government spent 1,211 on a white child's education while spending only 771 on an Indian child's, 496 on a colored child, and only 146 rands on an African child's education. I taught students how apartheid categorized and funded the lives of white, Indian, colored, and African people differently during apartheid, and how this then impacted the lives of the different races and our understanding of racial politics today. I wanted them to understand why the Western Cape had a colored versus African conflict which flared up at each election and were used by political parties like the Democratic Alliance and, to an extent, the African National Congress at each election. The reaction to this shocked me. The reaction from parents as well as students was shocking. Parents sent emails to the program coordinator calling for my head, and some parents even made personal visits to the coordinator calling me divisive, racist, and not fit to teach. Students themselves threatened to boycott my class as they felt I had offended them. I had to ask myself, what was I teaching that was racist? Upon further interrogation, it became clear that students did not understand the sociological meaning of privilege and were therefore shocked when I said colored and Indian people had some privilege during apartheid because they were placed in a hierarchy that meant they had a different experience of apartheid to Africans. This was a function of our education system not teaching our history properly, as well as parents not giving children a basic understanding of South African politics. in drawing a curriculum that would then respond to this reaction and that would help students to understand this properly and further, I then went back to the fundamental questions for curriculum development, which I believe in. I had to ask myself, who am I teaching? Why am I teaching them? Whose knowledge am I teaching them? To what end or purpose am I teaching them? And what impact does the purpose have on the manner in which I teach them? And what do the students bring to the learning process? Who am I as a teacher, and what do I bring to the learning process? And does it help or hinder the learning process? And this is how I then was able to come up with a solution. The solution was that it was clear that there was an active attempt by parents and therefore students to erase apartheid in the interrogating of its effects on students and race discussions today. I had to find a solution that would work for everyone. And I spoke to a number of people and came up with a number of pedagogic interventions. The first was to run a series of privilege walk exercises which sought to make privilege visible for students. The second was to use technology to get students to understand how their race, gender, and class impact on their worldviews and lived experience. I developed a digital storytelling assessment, and this called for students to think about their identity, particularly race, gender, and class mainly, but also religion and other factors of identity, and develop a digital story that answered some of the following questions. Who are you? That will focus on the identity. What impact does your identity have on your worldviews? Who in or outside your family had the biggest impact on your worldviews? And how does this, your identity or worldview, affect your political life and decision making? The result was a series of beautiful stories where students unpacked their identity and its impact on the worldview and politics. This exercise was first done in second year class in 2016, but was then moved to be a first year exercise in 2017. Some students who have undergone this exercise will show and tell you about its impact after this. Another exercise that I completed after doing digital storytelling was an exercise which was called digital community asset mapping. This exercise was important because while I was happy that I had unpacked the philosophy that the political is personal and students had a better understanding of who they were and how that impacted them in South African society, there was still another part missing. Ubuntu is a philosophical concept that says umntu ngumntu ngabantu, which essentially means I am because we are. I needed students to understand not only themselves as individuals, but also themselves as members of communities, which also had an impact. This digital community asset mapping exercise started because I also wanted students to have a deep understanding of local government politics, but I was not interested in just teaching it from a theoretical perspective. In 2016, second-year political reporting students had participated in the local government elections by spending a week at the Independent Electoral Commission Results Center. They learned about the local government politics and the electoral system by doing. And although the first-year students were not at the IEC, the elections themselves provided us an opportunity to engage deeply with local government politics. In 2016, I had asked students to do a walkabout in their community and interview the local councillor as well as residents and take pictures of the challenges and issues facing the community. This exercise had worked well, particularly because there were buzz in the air and because we were undergoing municipal elections and students were excited to be in voting centers interviewing community members, for example. They reported that this made them feel like real journalists, and I wanted to replicate this, but without an election in 2017, it was an impossible feat. I then decided to rather have students do the same exercise, but now to develop it on my maps on Google, as well as use the story map tool to build a story around it and what they found in their communities. This exercise was done for first years in 2017, and then in 2018 a new layer of complexity was added. I believe that in this presentation I've laid the background for how I came to teaching with technology and how technology fitted into my own attempts to decolonize the curriculum, and I hope that you understand some of the motivating factors. Some of the first year and second year students who have participated in these digital exercises or learning with technology will now present their work to you and talk you through their experiences of completing the exercises that I sent out and their exercises of actually participating in the development of their own curriculum as decolonizing the curriculum calls upon us to do. Thank you. I leave you with this quote by Angela Davis, which says, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things that I cannot accept," which really was one of the motivating factors for me when I was thinking about the curriculum and for me when I was going through all of the challenges that I was facing with students. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the students' presentations.
Mm-hmm.